I sabotaged my granddaughter's honeymoon before the plane even landed. Not with anger, not with jealousy. With a phone call I made at 4 a.m. while she was sleeping in a hotel bed she didn't know was paid for with strings. My name is Vivian Price, and I have spent 31 years raising a child that wasn't born from my body, but was built from my bones. My daughter passed when Naomi was 3. Car accident on a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary day that becomes a grave marker in your memory forever. No one asked me if I was ready. No one checked if I had the money, the patience, the youth left to start over with a toddler who kept calling for a woman who would never walk through the door again. I just did it. The way women in my family have always done it. You don't wait for permission to survive. You pick up the child, you lock the grief in a room you'll visit later, and you keep moving until your feet remember how. So when I tell you something is wrong, I am not guessing. I am reading a room the way a woman reads a room after 67 years of watching people. Naomi met Gerald Whitmore at a fundraiser in Charlotte. She was 26, wearing a green dress she'd saved for, laughing with a friend near the bar. Gerald was 30, polished in that way some men are when their mothers have spent decades grooming them for public consumption. Good posture, easy smile, the kind of handshake that makes you feel chosen. His mother, Constance Whitmore, stood 15 feet away, watching the introduction like a woman supervising a transaction. I wasn't there that night, but Naomi described it to me the next morning with that voice young women use when they believe fate has finally shown up wearing a suit. He asked for my number, Grandma. He said I had the most honest laugh he'd ever heard. Honest. That word stayed with me longer than it should have. I met Constance 4 months into the relationship at a Sunday dinner Gerald insisted on. She lived in a home in Myers Park that smelled like fresh lilies and old authority. The dining room had crown molding and a table long enough to seat 12, though only 5 of us sat down. Constance at the head, Gerald to her right. His younger brother, Dennis, across from him, scrolling his phone like the food was beneath his interest. Gerald's father, Martin, sat at the other end, quiet, careful, the kind of man who had learned decades ago that the safest place in a room is wherever Constance isn't looking. She greeted me warmly. That's the word people use when they mean something more complicated. Her hand wrapped around mine with a firmness that said, "I'm measuring you." Her smile was generous, and her voice was melodic, and every sentence she spoke felt like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror until the edges were smooth enough to cut without leaving marks. "You raised her beautifully," she told me, glancing at Naomi the way you glance at a painting you're considering purchasing. "She's so well-mannered, so respectful. Respectful. Not smart, not funny, not ambitious. Respectful. Like the highest compliment a young woman could earn was knowing when to be quiet. I thanked her because that's what you do when the room belongs to someone else and your granddaughter is watching you with hopeful eyes. But I cataloged the word the way I catalog every word that doesn't sit right, because language tells you what people value. And Constance valued compliance. Over the next year, I watched. I'm good at watching. I watched Constance compliment Naomi in ways that always circled back to Gerald. "You make him so happy. You're exactly what he needed." As if Naomi's purpose was to complete a man rather than to exist as her own person. I watched how Gerald never disagreed with his mother in front of anyone. Not once. Not about the restaurant choice. Not about the vacation plan. Not about the guest list for a party Naomi was supposedly co-hosting but had no say in. He deferred to Constance with the ease of a man who had never been asked to stand on his own. I tried to warn Naomi. Not once. Not at the last minute. I tried early, the way the comments on these videos always say a grandmother should. I tried when the relationship was 6 months old, and Naomi came home glowing from a weekend at the Whitmore Lake House. I sat her down at my kitchen table in my small house in West Charlotte, poured her tea, and said what I thought was clear enough. "Baby," I said, "pay attention to how a man treats his mother's opinions versus yours, because that's the blueprint for your marriage." Naomi smiled at me the way young women smile at old women when they think wisdom is just worry wearing a different hat. "Grandma," she said gently, "you're overthinking it. Gerald loves me. His family has been nothing but welcoming. Welcoming. Another word that sounds like a gift but can function like a trap." I pushed a little harder. "Welcoming is easy when they're still deciding what you're worth," I said. Naomi's smile faded. She set her cup down carefully, the way people do when they're trying not to let frustration show. "Grandma, please, don't do this. Don't make me choose between trusting you and trusting my own heart." And there it was. The wall. The one every grandmother hits when she tries to warn a young woman in love, because love makes people allergic to caution. It makes them hear danger as jealousy, wisdom as interference, protection as control. I saw it in her eyes, the fear that I would become the obstacle instead of the anchor, so I backed off, not because I stopped seeing what I saw, but because pushing harder would have pushed her closer to them and further from me. I chose patience over precision. I chose to stay close enough to catch her when she needed catching. The engagement came 14 months later. Gerald proposed at a rooftop restaurant with a ring Constance had helped select. Naomi called me crying happy tears, and I cried too, because love is complicated and sometimes you cry for joy and grief at the same time. The wedding planning began immediately, and Constance took over the way weather takes over a landscape. Quietly at first, then completely. She suggested the venue, the florist, the caterer, the photographer. She didn't demand, she recommended. And every recommendation came wrapped in phrases designed to make refusal feel ungrateful. "I found the most wonderful planner," she told Naomi over lunch one afternoon. "She handled Dennis's christening and the annual gala. She's family adjacent. Family adjacent." As if proximity to the Whitmores was a credential. Naomi looked at me across the table. I kept my face neutral. Naomi smiled and said, "That sounds lovely, Constance. Thank you." I held my tongue because I had learned the cost of speaking too soon, but I watched Constance's smile widen with the satisfaction of a woman who had just moved a piece on a board only she could see. Now let me tell you about the money, because without the money, Constance Whitmore would have been nothing more than an overbearing mother-in-law. Unpleasant, yes. Dangerous, no. My late husband, Robert Price, was a quiet man who worked for the railroad for 38 years. He didn't talk much about finances. He didn't flash anything. When he died 11 years ago, I found a life insurance policy I didn't know existed, not a small one. A policy he'd been paying into since before Naomi was born, structured to mature and compound in ways I didn't understand, until a financial advisor named Lorraine Mitchell sat me down and walked me through it slowly, like she was teaching someone how to read a map in a language they'd never spoken. Combined with the property Robert's family had held in rural Anson County for 3 generations, land that sat on rights nobody thought about until an energy company came knocking with offers that made my hands shake, the total value of what Naomi stood to inherit was just over $140 million. I'll say that again because the number still doesn't feel real in my mouth. $140 million. It wasn't sitting in a checking account. It was layered inside a trust Lorraine helped me build, structured so tightly that accessing it required specific conditions, specific ages, specific life events. Naomi knew she'd inherit something. She didn't know how much. I kept it that way on purpose, because wealth you understand too young becomes wealth you lose too fast, and wealth that people around you discover becomes wealth that people around you plan for. Nobody in our neighborhood knew. Nobody at church knew. I drove the same car. I wore the same clothes. I kept the same modest life, because modesty is the best security system money can't buy. When people think you're ordinary, they don't send their sons to marry your granddaughters with agendas attached. Constance Whitmore didn't know about the trust, but Constance Whitmore was the kind of woman who could smell opportunity the way certain animals smell water underground. She didn't need details. She needed access. And marriage was the door she planned to walk through. The wedding was 3 weeks away when I heard something that made my entire body go cold. Naomi and I were at a final dress fitting. She stood on a small platform while a seamstress adjusted her hem, and her phone sat on the chair beside me, screen up. A message appeared from Constance. I didn't mean to read it, but the preview was long enough to catch. After the ceremony, we'll schedule a family financial meeting. Martin will have Douglas prepare the consolidation documents. It's better to handle these things while everyone is still in celebration mode. Celebration mode. I read that phrase 3 times. Each time it got colder. Consolidation documents. Family financial meeting, while everyone is still in celebration mode. That last part was the confession disguised as strategy. She wanted Naomi softened by joy, surrounded by new family, too grateful and too polite to ask what she was signing. I didn't react. I set the phone down exactly where it had been and watched Naomi smile at herself in the mirror, spinning slowly, watching the fabric move. She looked like her mother in that moment. The same wide eyes, the same belief that beauty means safety. That night, I called Lorraine Mitchell. "Lorraine," I said, "I need you to activate the marriage clause." There was a pause. Then Lorraine said, in that steady tone she uses when she knows trouble is close, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said, "and I need it done before the wedding." The marriage clause was something Lorraine and I had built into the trust 7 years ago, back when Naomi started dating seriously and I started losing sleep. It was simple in concept and devastating in execution. Upon Naomi's marriage, the original trust would restructure automatically. The new structure would narrow beneficiaries to Naomi alone. No spouse, no in-laws, no exceptions. And it contained a provision that still makes me exhale with relief every time I think about it. Any attempt to coerce, pressure, or expedite financial decisions by parties outside the trust within the first year of marriage would trigger an automatic review, a freeze on all distributions, and a formal investigation by the trustees' legal team. Lorraine called it the firewall. I called it common sense wrapped in legal language. If you're watching this right now, I want you to hear me clearly. You do not need $140 million to protect yourself. You need one honest conversation with someone who understands that love and money occupy the same house, but should never share the same bed without a lock on the door. The wedding happened on a Saturday in October, a garden ceremony at a historic estate outside Charlotte, white chairs, dogwood trees, a string quartet playing something soft that made old women reach for tissues and young women reach for their phones. Naomi was radiant. Gerald was handsome. Constance sat in the front row wearing ivory, which I found telling because ivory is the color you wear when you want to look like the bride without anyone accusing you of trying. I watched the vows. I watched Gerald's face when he said forever. I watched Constance's face when Naomi said, "I do." Gerald looked sincere. Constance looked satisfied. Those are not the same thing. At the reception, Constance floated through the room the way she always did, touching elbows, leaning in close, laughing at the right volume. She found me near the dessert table and placed her hand on my arm with that practiced warmth. "Vivian," she said, smiling wide, "you must be so proud. She's part of our family now." Our family. Not their family, ours. As if marriage were an acquisition. I smiled back. "I am proud," I said. I raised her to know her worth. Constance's smile stayed, but her eyes shifted. Just for a fraction, the way a compass needle twitches when it senses a different north. The honeymoon was supposed to be 2 weeks in Costa Rica, Gerald's gift, though I suspect Constance funded it. They flew out Sunday morning. By Sunday evening, Constance called me. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity is a powerful thing when you already know someone's playbook. "Vivian," she sang into the phone, warm as fresh bread. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're not too lonely with Naomi gone." "I'm fine, Constance," I said. "Thank you for asking." She paused the way people pause when they're about to transition from pleasantry to purpose. "You know," she continued, "Martin and I were talking, and we think it would be wonderful to sit down as a family when the kids get back. Just a simple meeting. Nothing formal. Just to make sure everyone is aligned financially." Aligned. That word again. Every word Constance used was a brick in a wall she was building around my granddaughter. Aligned, consolidated, protected, organized, each one sounding helpful, each one meaning control. "What kind of meeting?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Oh, just standard family planning," she said quickly. "We do it with all our children when they marry. It helps avoid confusion later." Confusion. The cousin of the word she really meant, which was independence. "That sounds thoughtful," I said. "I'll let Naomi know you'd like to schedule something." Constance's voice brightened instantly. "Wonderful. We'll have Douglas draw up a few documents. Nothing complicated. Just acknowledgements and beneficiary alignments." She said beneficiary alignments the way someone says pass the salt, casual, expected, unquestioned. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my kitchen in the dark for 20 minutes, listening to the clock tick, feeling my heartbeat steady itself the way it does when a woman my age prepares for something she's been preparing for her whole life. I called Lorraine at 4 a.m. that Tuesday. Not because it was urgent in a legal sense, but because I needed to hear her voice confirm what I already knew. "Lorraine," I said, "she's moving." I told her about the call, the meeting, the documents, beneficiary alignments. Lorraine was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "The firewall is active. The restructured trust took effect the moment the marriage certificate was filed. Anything they bring to that table is anchored to a structure that no longer exists." "Good," I said, and then I asked the question that mattered most. "If they pressure her, then the clause triggers," Lorraine said, "and they lose any future claim, permanently." I exhaled slowly, not from relief, from readiness. Naomi came back from Costa Rica with a tan and a tension I could see in the way she held her shoulders. She came to my house before she even went home, still in her travel clothes, hair tied back, eyes tired but searching. "Grandma," she said, sitting at my table like she always does when the world feels heavy. Gerald's mom called him every day on the honeymoon, every single day. She kept talking about some meeting we need to have. Something about aligning finances and getting organized before the year ends. Organized. There was that word. The same word Constance uses the way a locksmith uses a pick. Quietly, precisely, with full knowledge of what's on the other side of the door. I didn't panic. I didn't lecture. I poured her coffee and sat down across from her. "What did Gerald say?" I asked. Naomi looked at her hands. "He said it's normal. He said his family does this with everyone. He said it's just how they handle things." Handle things. I noted how Naomi repeated his words without endorsing them. Her mouth was saying his sentences, but her eyes were asking me if they were true. I leaned forward. "Baby," I said softly. "I tried to tell you about this family a long time ago. You weren't ready to hear it. Are you ready now?" Naomi's jaw tightened. Then it softened. Then her eyes filled with something between shame and recognition. "I thought you were just being protective," she whispered. "I thought you didn't like them because they had money and we didn't." I shook my head slowly. "We have more than they think," I said, "and that's exactly the problem." I told her everything that morning, not just about the trust, but about why the trust existed, about Robert's quiet planning, about the land in Anson County, about the mineral rights that turned family dirt into generational wealth, about the life insurance policy that matured into a number that still makes my breath catch. I told her about Lorraine Mitchell, about the marriage clause, about the firewall. Naomi sat there with her coffee going cold, staring at me like I'd pulled back a curtain she didn't know existed. $140 million? She repeated, her voice barely above a breath. I nodded. "And you never told me how much?" "I told you there was an inheritance," I said. "I didn't tell you the size because the size changes how people treat you, and I wanted you to be loved for who you are, not what you carry." Naomi's eyes welled up. Not from the money, from the understanding. From realizing that every quiet choice I'd made, every modest car, every unchanged house, every time I said we're comfortable instead of we're wealthy, was protection dressed as simplicity. "So when Constance talks about aligning finances," Naomi said slowly, "she's trying to get access to something she doesn't even know the size of." "She's trying to get access to you," I corrected. "The money is secondary. Control is the goal. The money is just the reward." 3 days later, the meeting happened. Not at my house. At the Whitmore residence, Constance's territory. She'd arranged it for a Wednesday evening, the kind of timing that feels casual but is calculated. Midweek, low energy. People are tired on Wednesdays. Tired people don't argue. I drove Naomi there myself. She didn't ask me to come inside. I didn't ask to be invited. I simply parked, walked to the door beside her, and when Constance opened it with that wide, practiced smile, I stepped over the threshold like I'd been expected all along. Constance's smile held, but her eyes recalculated. "Vivian," she said warmly, "what a lovely surprise." It wasn't a surprise, and she knew it. Inside, the dining room was set like a conference, papers stacked neatly at one end. Martin sat with a glass of water, looking like a man who'd been positioned. Dennis was there, leaning back, arms crossed, performing disinterest. Gerald stood near the window, hands in his pockets, not quite looking at Naomi, not quite looking away. And at the table, seated with a leather portfolio and a calm, professional expression, was a man I'd never seen before. Constance gestured toward him with the grace of a woman presenting a gift. "This is Douglas Farber," she said. "He's been our family's financial coordinator for years. He's here to help make everything smooth." Smooth. Another pillow pressed over a mouth. Douglas nodded professionally. "Good evening," he said. "I've prepared a few standard documents for the family's review." Standard. There it was. The word that means stop thinking and start signing. Naomi sat down slowly. I sat beside her. Constance noticed, and her lips thinned for just a moment before the smile returned. Douglas opened his portfolio and spread 3 documents across the table. Each one looked clean, official, harmless. He began explaining in that measured tone professionals use when they want you to feel safe. "These are acknowledgement forms," he said. "They establish shared financial visibility between spouses and immediate family. It's a common practice for families who want to avoid misunderstandings down the line." Shared financial visibility. The phrase sounded reasonable. It was designed to, but I'd heard phrases like it before. Temporary management, beneficiary alignment, family protection. They all sound like shelter. They all function like cages. Naomi reached for the first page. Her fingers touched the corner. She didn't pick it up. She just rested her hand there, feeling the weight of the paper like it might tell her something the words couldn't. Constance leaned forward. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "this is just a formality. Gerald signed his when he turned 25. Dennis signed his at 23. It's how we keep everything transparent." Transparent. The word floated across the table like a dare. I watched Naomi's face. I watched the part of her that wanted to please wrestle with the part of her that remembered our conversation 3 days ago. I watched her eyes dart to Gerald, searching for something solid to hold on to. Gerald shifted by the window. "Babe," he said softly, "it's not a big deal. Mom's just being thorough." Thorough. Another brick. Naomi's hand slid closer to the pen Douglas had placed beside the documents. Her breathing changed. Shallow, quick. The breathing of a woman being pulled in 2 directions by people she loves. Constance saw the hesitation and adjusted instantly, her voice dropping into something almost maternal. "You don't have to read every line right now," she said gently. "Douglas can walk you through the highlights. The important thing is that we're all on the same page before the year ends." Before the year ends. Urgency disguised as convenience. I'd been silent long enough. Not because I didn't have words, because I was waiting for the right moment to use them. And the right moment is always the moment before the pen touches the page. "I'd like to read the documents first," I said. The room shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. The way a room shifts when someone breaks a rhythm everyone else was counting on. Constance turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her temples. "Vivian," she said, voice sweet as syrup over steel, "this is really between Naomi and Gerald. Family business. I am her family," I said. And I kept my voice even because volume is the enemy of authority. Calm is what makes people listen. Douglas glanced between us, professional instinct, telling him the temperature had changed. He slid the first document toward me without being asked. Constance's jaw tightened. Martin looked at his water glass like it held the answers to everything he'd never said in 40 years of marriage. I read the first page slowly, then the second. The language was smooth, well-crafted. The kind of language that makes you feel like you're reading a permission slip, not a power transfer. But buried in paragraph 4, subsection C, was a clause that made my blood go cold and my mind go sharp. Spousal and familial acknowledgement of shared interest in all pre-existing and post-marital financial instruments, including trusts, annuities, and property holdings, to be recognized as communal assets upon execution of this agreement. Communal assets. Pre-existing trusts. Upon execution, they weren't asking Naomi to share what she'd built with Gerald. They were asking her to hand over everything she'd inherited before she ever met him. I set the paper down gently. I looked at Douglas. "Mr. Farber," I said quietly, "are you aware that the trust referenced in this document was restructured prior to the marriage?" Silence. The kind that has weight. Douglas blinked once. Restructured? He repeated. Constance's hand moved to the table, palm flat, pressing down as if she could hold the moment in place. That's not relevant, she said quickly. These are standard acknowledgments. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Douglas because professionals understand liability the way predators understand risk. When you threaten their license, you threaten their cooperation. The trust in question, I continued, no longer recognizes spousal or familial beneficiaries. It was restructured to limit access exclusively to the named beneficiary. Douglas's pen stopped moving. His eyes went to the document, then back to me. Mrs. Price, he said carefully, can you clarify the nature of the restructuring? I can do better than that, I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a letter from Lorraine Mitchell, on her firm's letterhead, dated 3 days before the wedding. It confirmed the trust restructuring. It confirmed the marriage clause. And it confirmed the anti-coercion provision in language so clear that even Constance couldn't twist it into something digestible. I placed it in front of Douglas. He read it in silence. His face didn't change, but his posture did. He leaned back, away from the documents, away from the table, away from whatever Constance had hired him to facilitate. Constance's composure cracked. Just a fracture, but I saw it. Her smile disappeared. Her eyes hardened. She looked at the letter, then at me, then at Naomi, as if trying to figure out which woman had betrayed her expectation of compliance. What is this? She demanded, voice dropping the warmth like it was a coat she no longer needed. It's clarity, I said. Douglas closed his portfolio slowly. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, addressing Constance with a tone that had shifted from collaborative to cautious. The letter references an anti-coercion clause. If these documents are presented under circumstances that could be interpreted as pressure, it could trigger consequences that would be unfavorable for all parties. Unfavorable, the professional's word for catastrophic. Constance turned to Gerald. Her eyes were sharp. Say something, she hissed, the same command mothers give sons when they expect obedience to override everything else. Gerald looked at Naomi. His face was pale. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then, for the first time since I'd known him, he looked at his mother and said something she didn't script. Mom, stop. 2 words. Small, quiet, devastating. Constance flinched like he'd struck her. Martin's head lifted slowly, eyes wide, as if witnessing something that had never happened in that dining room before. Dennis uncrossed his arms and stood up, suddenly interested in being somewhere else. Naomi watched her husband. I watched her watching him. And in her eyes I saw the thing every woman needs to see before she can trust a man. She saw him choose her. Not smoothly, not heroically, clumsily, shakily, late. But he chose. Gerald stepped away from the window. He walked to the table, picked up the 3 documents Douglas had laid out, and held them toward his mother. We're not signing anything tonight, he said. His voice was unsteady, but his hands were still. Constance stared at the papers in his hands like they were a weapon pointed at her chest. After everything this family has done for you, she said, and her voice cracked in a place she didn't expect. Gerald swallowed. What you've done, he said quietly, is what we need to talk about. But not tonight, and not like this. He set the papers down in front of Douglas and looked at Naomi. Let's go home, he said. Naomi stood. She looked at me. Not for permission. For acknowledgement. The kind of look a woman gives another woman when she realizes the lesson finally landed. I nodded once. Slow. Naomi took Gerald's hand and they walked out of that dining room together. Not fast, not dramatic, steady. I stayed behind for exactly 3 seconds longer, long enough to look at Constance, long enough to see the rage and the calculation and the disbelief fighting for space behind her eyes, long enough to pick up Lorraine's letter from the table, fold it neatly, and slide it back into my purse. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't gloat. I walked out of that house the same way I'd walked in, quiet, prepared, finished. In the car driving home, the Charlotte skyline glowing soft against the October sky, I thought about Robert, about the policy he paid into for decades without telling me, about the land his family held when nobody thought it was worth holding, about how silence, real silence, the kind that requires discipline and patience and faith, is the most expensive gift you can give someone you love. Naomi called me that night. Her voice was raw but clear. "Grandma," she said, "I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." I closed my eyes and held the phone against my cheek. "You listened when it mattered," I said. "That's enough." It was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "He chose me." I smiled in the dark of my living room, where Robert's photo sat on the mantel and the lock on my cabinet held everything that mattered. "He chose you," I said. "Now teach him how to keep choosing you." I hung up the phone, locked my front door, and sat in my chair until my breathing slowed and the silence in my house felt like safety instead of emptiness. Because that's what protection sounds like when it's done right. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand applause. It just holds the line until the people you love are strong enough to hold it themselves. If you're watching this, tell me where you're watching from. And tell me this: who in your life held the line for you when you were too young or too trusting to hold it yourself? Because somebody did. And they deserve to hear you say thank you before the silence between you becomes permanent.